Hello everyone, welcome to today's story. I'm certain today's episode will take you by surprise. For so long, James believed that Tung was the betrayer, the one who tried to come between him and Diep, the reason behind so many painful misunderstandings. But then, one quiet afternoon, Tung suddenly returned. His eyes were different, no longer defiant, but calm, like a man carrying a weight far greater than anyone could see. A truth will be revealed, a friendship restored. Yet at the same time, a hidden force, far greater than John, is beginning to show its face. Come with me into today's story and see what really happened. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts below, so we can feel and journey through this story together. The morning was crystal clear. Sunlight brushed against the last drops of dew clinging to the banana leaves. From somewhere far off came the sound of a rooster, blending with the warm, smoky scent of someone's kitchen fire. Diep had been awake since before dawn. She washed her face with a scoop of cool water, then stepped into the garden where rows of green vegetables shimmered beneath the mist. Her small hands moved quickly and patiently, pulling weeds, tying neat bundles, every motion calm and precise, carrying a quiet grace of diligence. A little dog trotted at her feet, now and then lifting its head as if trying to speak to her. The village felt so peaceful it was as though time itself had stopped. Until James's phone rang, shattering the silence. On the other end of the line, he spoke softly about a trip that had been arranged days ago, and that he wanted Diep to come along with him. At James's house, the morning light was gentle. He sat at the tea table, a file already open before him. 50 tons of timber from Mr. Kwan. It was a meeting set well in advance, a transaction that seemed ordinary, but had lingered in his mind for days. Mr. Kwan was known as an experienced trader, but in a market this tight, having so much surplus wood didn't make sense. It made James uneasy. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the window where sunlight filtered through the trees, flickering like the thoughts tangled in his head. His mother sat nearby, occasionally glancing up at him, her face filled with quiet worry. She knew her son was careful, yet in her heart stirred a vague fear that someone, somewhere, was laying a trap. James closed the folder gently and drew a slow breath. He wasn't one to run from things. The only way to learn the truth was to walk straight into it. He rose, put on his jacket, and nodded to his mother before heading out the door. Diep walked along the narrow dirt path leading to the main road, gently lifting the hem of her dress, her eyes fixed on the distance, waiting for something, or someone, familiar. From afar, the hum of an engine broke through the quiet morning air. The familiar car slowed to a stop beside the small lane, where Diep stood tucked behind a row of orange trees heavy with fruit. James stepped out. Sunlight slid across his shoulder, catching in his slightly tousled hair and giving it a soft brown sheen. A faint smile appeared on his lips, just enough to make the whole moment feel lighter. Each time they met, there was always something indescribable between them, both familiar and shy, as if neither dared to breathe too loud for fear of shattering that fragile peace. In Diep's eyes, he wasn't only the man who had helped her weather so many storms, but the quiet place she could finally trust. And for James, the sight of her standing beneath the open blue sky, her dress stirring gently in the wind, was enough to make every trace of fatigue disappear. The red dirt road twisted its way toward the lumberyard. As James's car pulled in, the headlights swept across a patch of damp forest, smoke, dust, and the sharp scent of resin mingling thick in the air. In the distance, Mr. Kwan stood waiting with a few workers, their posture alert, their faces unreadable. James stepped out. Mr. Kwan approached and offered a firm handshake. It was polite, practiced, yet in both their eyes lingered the same quiet suspicion. They each knew that in deals like this, words were just surface. Truth would only reveal itself with time. Before James lay hundreds of logs, stacked high on trucks and scattered across the muddy ground. Their bark was darkened by rain, the air heavy with moisture. He crouched to inspect one. His fingers brushed a fresh saw mark. Water seeped from the grain, dripping onto a metal scale beside him. The puddle spread slowly, blurring the numbers that flickered unsteadily on the gauge. A few logs still bore shipping tags with smeared ink, as if they'd been peeled off once and pressed back on. A strange unease crept through him. Everything here felt too neat, too convenient. A massive shipment, suspiciously cheap, appearing right when his company was struggling. It all lined up a little too perfectly. Still, he nodded. Maybe instinct told him. The only way to see who set the trap was to walk straight into it. Mr. Kwan smiled, his expression mild but impossible to read. He pulled out a temporary contract, voice calm and steady as James listened, catching every word. James took the pen and signed. His handwriting was slow, deliberate, yet beneath it, a quiet tension stirred, as if he were signing not just a business deal, but something deeper, something unseen. Behind him, Diep stood beneath the corrugated roof, watching in silence. She saw him smile, but it wasn't the easy smile she knew. There was something forced in it, tinged with worry she couldn't quite name. Inside the yard, the sound of wood striking wood echoed dry and hollow, blending with the distant rumble of thunder, a warning that no one seemed to hear. After meeting with Mr. Kwan, James drove Diep to a small roadside noodle shop, a place he always stopped by whenever business brought him to this side of the hills. The shop was tucked against the slope, modest but spotless. The scent of broth and grilled fish mingled with the smoke from the kitchen, drifting warmly into the afternoon air. Diep sat at an old wooden table, her eyes bright with both surprise and delight. She had never imagined that someone as successful as James would choose a place so simple, so ordinary. James smiled at her and ordered 2 bowls of fish noodle soup, his tone light and familiar. "I've eaten here for years," he said. "The taste never changes." When the bowls arrived, steam rose thick and fragrant, the aroma of river fish blending with the sour tang of vinegar and the sharp heat of chili. Diep leaned forward for a taste, her eyes lighting up with quiet joy. She didn't speak, but something warm unfurled in her chest, a strange, gentle happiness born from a small act of care, so simple, yet so real. James sat across from her, silent, watching. He saw the curve of her smile through the haze of steam, saw how calm she looked in that soft light. And in that instant, he realized, amid all the schemes and dangers waiting outside, this moment, right here, was the only one that felt like peace. The phone rang. It had been a long time since James last saw Tung's name appear on the screen. He froze for a moment, a strange mix of surprise and caution rising inside him. It must be something important, he thought, glancing toward Diep. She nodded softly, her eyes touched with quiet concern. The cafe was on the 2nd floor, built into the side of a hill. A gentle wind moved through the cactus plants on the balcony. Tung was already there, slowly turning a glass of iced tea in his hand, his gaze lost in the distance. His face was calm, yet his eyes carried something unspoken, like a man who had held a secret far too long. When James and Diep arrived, Tung greeted them with a smile, peaceful, almost serene, so unlike the sharp expression he once wore. "I think you've both misunderstood me for a long time," he began softly. "There's something I need to tell you." James frowned slightly. Diep looked at him, uncertain. Tung took a deep breath, his voice low and steady. "I was never working for John. I'm an undercover officer, assigned to investigate the illegal timber trade he's running. And soon, I'll need your help." James lowered his head, a pang tightening in his chest. All this time, the friend he'd thought was a traitor had been quietly protecting him. He'd been too quick to judge, and now realized he owed the man an apology. Tung's eyes met theirs, firm, but tinged with sadness. He spoke of the long months spent living undercover, pretending to side with John, just to get close enough to gather proof. The air in the cafe began to soften. James lifted his gaze and gave a slow nod, admiration glinting in his eyes. He reached out his hand. The handshake between the two men carried everything: regret, respect, and forgiveness unspoken. Beside them, Diep smiled gently. She understood that their friendship had weathered its storm, and today, it was finally clean again. Tung looked at the two of them, his tone quiet but warm. "I'm glad you found each other," he said. "Treasure that." James nodded, and Diep simply whispered, "Thank you, Tung." In that moment, no more words were needed. Everything had been resolved by one truth, one blessing, and a friendship that would endure, no matter where their separate paths might lead. The last rays of daylight filtered weakly through the trees, scattering across the rain-slicked road. Diep sat quietly in the car, her thoughts still stirred, as if she'd just come through a storm and hadn't quite found her breath again. James suddenly slowed and stopped in front of a small shop. Behind the glass window stood rows of white plaster figures, a pair of rabbits holding hands, a few tiny birds, and unpainted vases waiting for color. He smiled. "Let's go in." Surprised, she followed him inside. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint, and soft music floated through the space. They chose a small table by the window, where the evening light slanted in, golden like honey. James set down two small figurines, one a male rabbit, the other a female. Diep picked up a brush, her hand trembling slightly. It was her first time painting. The first strokes bled gently into the surface, soft and fluid, like the look in her eyes whenever they met his. They laughed together, their movements easy, in rhythm with the quiet music. When they finished, the two rabbits sat side by side, both facing the same direction. James looked at Diep and smiled. "Sometimes, after everything, all we really need is to sit together and paint back the colors that time has faded."